Hello everyone. This is a drawing of a droplet. It's quite a quickish video, this one, just to give you an indication of how to do the technique, what pencils to use and things to look out for. So I've drawn out the basic shape of the droplet, as you can see on the left. I've drawn it out using an H pencil very lightly. Now I'm using what is an Onyx pencil, which is Onyx. Derwent make this. You can get it in medium and you can also get it in dark. The one I'm using is called dark. I think you can get a pack of 2 from online. Look out for the word Onyx, and as I say, the make is Derwent. Essentially, the advantage of it is that you can get a very, very sharp point, as you can see, and it sells itself as being black. Well, it's graphite, so by definition it isn't black, but it does give you quite a dark tone. Having said that, if you use a 3B, very, very heavy, with heavy pressure, that will do the same thing. I just want you to notice how I'm applying these strokes here. If you noticed, I came down diagonally in one direction to a certain point halfway about through on the shadow. Then I changed my direction and then went over the top of that in the opposite diagonal direction, therefore smoothing over the ends of the strokes from the previous layer, and that's called cross-hatching. You'll notice me doing this quite a lot. Now, you may be familiar with cross-hatching when you're doing loose cross-hatching, say if you're doing life drawing or doing sketching. When you're doing photorealistic drawing, it's the same process, but you're making your strokes very, very close together. Because ideally you don't want to see your strokes, you want it to look realistic, so you want it to look completely smooth. So when you notice how I'm applying these strokes, each time I come back down over a previous stroke that I've already made, therefore smoothing it out. So it's quite an important thing to notice that. And also think about how many layers I'm putting on this given area. Lots and lots. I mean, when you consider all the different cross-hatching layers, there must be about 5 or 6 layers. Each time I'm crossing over the previous layer that I've done, and I'm trying to even out my strokes. You notice me use my finger there, my little finger, just lightly, just to sort of smooth out as well. And now I'm going over just to even out even more and just get a really smooth effect. Little things like that really do make a difference when you're doing photorealistic drawing. And notice how dark that now is compared to the light that's on the droplet. The paper I'm using for this is Bristol Board illustration board. Very, very smooth, very white, and virtually no tooth to it, so it's extremely smooth. The virtue of that is that you can get quite a high contrast because the paper is white, and when you're doing something like water, you need very high contrast values. It is, however, a little bit more demanding, I think, to do your hatching strokes on it because you don't have the tooth of the paper to help you. So you may find that you need a few more layers with it. You may find that you need to use a tortillon, but have a go, try it, see how you get on. So we used Onyx, just to recap, in the shadow underneath the droplet. Now I'm using H, and I'll also be using HB and B, and finally 2B. Notice that I'm using this H on the side because I'm trying to get a little bit more graphite on there to aim to try and get a little bit of texture, which, as I've said, is difficult with this paper because there isn't the same tooth that you have with cartridge paper. But if you use the pencil on the side, you can get a tiny bit. Now, in that droplet you've got the texture of the leaf that's showing through, that's refracted in it. So this is why I'm trying to get the balance between a little bit of the texture of the leaf but also the smoothness of the water droplet. Now I'm going back to the onyx, using that on the side. I'm putting a little bit more texture with it. This is squircling, which is essentially dotting, moving the end of the pencil in tiny little areas so that you can give it an effective texture. Okay, so I've got something in there now. I've got the depth, the real depth, which is really important to get in first, because if I hadn't got that in, I wouldn't know how to build up the rest of the tones above it. Now I can start building in my midtones. Notice that I'm leaving the area at the bottom of the droplet completely white as long as possible, because I want those two contrast values to remain. Now I'm coming in with HB, and I'm working on a little bit of the depths on the droplet, and you want to try and get a little bit of the graduation at the top of the droplet so that it looks round. So I'm basically working in with my HB, squircling, dotting, making little texture techniques, tiny little strokes, covering that area. It looks like I'm going quite fast, but you're kind of getting into a rhythm, but you're building it up quite quickly. But then you're building up lots and lots of layers of the same thing. So still with HB, leaving this area underneath, squircling, dotting. Notice that where the highlight is in the middle of the droplet, I drew that out first just to give me an indication of where it was. But you need to be really careful when you do that, that you don't leave an obvious line round the edge of it, because that looks too cartoon-like. You really want to make sure when you're doing photorealistic drawing that you don't leave lines, you leave edges. This is now a 4H I'm using, which is very smooth, and I'm going over the top just to sort of even it out and put a little bit more of a mid-tone on, and just merge all those different areas together. If you do this afterwards, it gives you quite a good effect. All the base brings the base tone down a little bit. So now back to HB, and then I'll be using B, and then eventually I'll be using 2B as well, just to get that little bit more depth in that shadow area on the droplet. So gradually I'm building up all the tones, keeping in mind the depth that I've got of that shadow underneath. And this is the area I was talking about now, that you shade around that area of highlight carefully, so you obscure the line that you drew out beforehand. With this sort of thing, you do need to make sure that you stand back regularly and look at it, because it's a bit difficult when you're really close sometimes to see it. And obviously at the moment I'm just drawing one droplet. If you were doing a leaf with a lot of droplets on it, I would suggest you draw out a few at a time, shade a few at a time, then draw out another few, shade them, obviously depending on how many droplets you've got, the size of scale that you're doing it at. And also you need to think about the background tones as well, because without the background and the graduation behind that droplet, the droplet's just going to look like it's sat there. So to do the leaf texture now, this is actually a hosta leaf, anyone that's interested. I'm using an H, again, slightly on the side, and you can see I've got a few little veins there in the hosta leaf, which I'm now highlighting with the H, and I'm trying to get a little bit of graduation in. That is the shadow on the leaf. And you can see at the bottom of the leaf section underneath the shadow, there's a little bit more depth on here, because each of those little sections of the leaf are rounded. So they come out, and then you can see on the drawn version on the left, it goes in again above the droplet. So I'm now hatching across horizontally on the strokes that I've done before. This is now HB. You could use B. So I'm got more firm pressure at the bottom, and then I'm taking my pressure out as I come out, as I come up, so that it appears as if it's looking rounded. Just then I used a tortillon just to smooth out a little bit, and you may find that if you're using Bristol Board you do need to use a tortillon a bit more, as I said, just to smooth out your strokes, because sometimes your strokes sit on the surface a little bit with Bristol Board and they don't always kind of go into the surface in the same way. Okay, and now you can see I'm writing what I've used on there. So that's Onyx, that's Derwent Onyx, and I would suggest that if you can only get a pack of two, get the pack of two, medium and dark. You can sometimes, I think, get them individually online. If you do, I would highly recommend you get the dark as opposed to the medium, because the reason you need it is for this sort of precision depth. Otherwise you might just as well use your other grade pencils, such as 2B or B. It is really useful. At the top here I've used H and HB and B and 2B, and I've also used Onyx over the top, and on the leaf I've used H and HB. There were layers of H previously, I should say, HB, B, 2B and then Onyx. Hope you enjoyed that.